Good afternoon, everyone. I will now call the special meeting of the Norfolk County Police Services Board to order. It is 1:01 in the afternoon. I will remind everyone that our meeting is being web streamed on the Norfolk County website. Welcome to those who may be watching this meeting via YouTube. This is an annual meeting required by the Norfolk County OPP contract, Section 6, subsection A of the contract, which states that the OPP shall provide police services to the municipality, including the enforcement of mutually agreed upon bylaws. The parties shall review this part of the agreement annually with the view of, I quote, revising or updating the list of bylaws required by the OPP enforcement. We are meeting today to fulfill this requirement and discuss the OPP bylaw enforcement cooperation. Everyone should have a copy of the agenda, which I have here. Hopefully everyone has that on their desk. The Police Services Board also sent out a letter containing a number of questions prepared for this meeting. You should also have a copy of that letter as well. That's dated November the 4th of 2020. The agenda also contains previous annual minutes or meeting minutes and 2 bylaws submitted by Norfolk County for the OPP enforcement. The primary discussion item is the annual municipal and OPP bylaw enforcement review. So I believe everyone should have that. Does everyone have it? Okay, great. All right. So to the members of the PSB, good afternoon and welcome. And to Madam Mayor, I believe you're watching us via... She is? Okay.
Good day, Mr. Santos.
Okay.
Yeah, I will turn the video on here just momentarily.
Okay, just want to confirm that. Welcome. Okay, so can I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda that has been submitted to us this afternoon? Okay, Willie. Seconder by Councillor Columbus. Okay, all right, very good. I will make note that there are regrets from Chair Trevally, and what he has made very clear here to me as the Vice Chair is please ensure that everyone understands the objective today. This is to get answers to the questions that we posed. Now, there are 25 questions that have been posed last week, and I don't expect that we're going to have 25 answers today, but we can hopefully have some direction from our bylaw officer, bylaw supervisor officer, correct? Okay. He also mentions here that the follow-on work will be and have to be with the PSB have a conversation with the OPP as to their willingness or capacity and capability to provide the service. And we will have it on the agenda for the next PSB meeting, which I understand to be November the 25th, later this month, to confirm the draft, if necessary, the agreement document for council concurrence. Okay, so by looking at this, I will look at the agenda. We'll look at the previous minutes. Now, the previous minutes, I understand, are information. So that's on page 3. So we'll go right into discussion. Point number 3, the annual municipal and OPP bylaw enforcement review. It's fairly straightforward. We have on the books the bylaw that regulates and prohibits excessive noise within Norfolk County. So the questions that we have posed here, which I believe are 25, what I will do is I'll put it over now to our bylaw supervisor in Norfolk County, Jim Milson, to basically give us a clear understanding of the questions that were posed to bylaw in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board and our OPP partners. For those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, my name is Jim Milson, and I've been on a contract with Norfolk as the bylaw supervisor since May of this year. By way of some background, I retired as a staff sergeant at the Norfolk County OPP detachment after 34 years of service. and was a detachment manager and acting detachment commander at Brant County, Bruce Peninsula, and Norfolk detachments prior to my retirement. I'm here to speak with you today in relation to the current agreement for the provision of policing services between the County of Norfolk and the Solicitor General of Ontario on behalf of the OPP. In Norfolk County, this agreement is referred to as Bylaw 2019-109. Paragraphs A and B of Section 6 in the agreement state that there will be a review of mutually agreed upon bylaws requiring OPP enforcement. It also states that any bylaw violations in relation to building codes and animal control will not form part of the agreement. As part of that annual review process, the board has requested that Norfolk County provide a list of the bylaws it would like to be enforced by the OPP, and that's what brings us here today. At this point, I would like to give you a quick snapshot of my department so that you have an awareness of what resources we have available to conduct bylaw investigations. Norfolk currently has a team of 5 municipal law enforcement officers, plus myself, with one of those assigned full-time to conduct cannabis investigations in relation to zoning infractions. In addition to parking charges, the remaining 4 officers combined to investigate over 1,100 cases last year and are on track to complete 1,900 investigations in 2021, a 170% increase in workload year over year. The officers work regular business hours, 8 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and as a rule do not work evenings, weekends, or statutory holidays. The bylaw complaint process has recently changed and has been simplified through the implementation of an online bylaw complaint form, which is automatically submitted to a dedicated bylaw mailbox for retrieval and assigning the next working day. This form can be found under the Bylaw tab at norfolkcounty.ca. And in working in conjunction with our policing partners, the OPP has also created a bylaw referral form for their officers to use when submitting calls for service to us in bylaw. With just 4 municipal law enforcement officers available to respond to bylaw calls, Norfolk County does not have the capacity to maintain bylaw investigations or patrols outside of regular business hours. There are typically very few calls from the public after hours that would require that enhanced level of service and added expense to the county anyway. As such, the OPP is needed to provide after-hours response to a very small number of bylaw complaints where there are issues of nuisance and public safety requiring immediate attendance and that some initial action be taken. We've discussed this need internally and believe the following bylaws fall into those nuisance and public safety-related categories. And these include after-hours complaints regarding parking and noise. Parking complaints would typically involve vehicles blocking fire hydrants, snow removal efforts, blocking driveways, blocking crosswalks, and similar parking issues where public safety is or could be affected. OPP action would include attempting to locate the owner, potentially issuing a parking infraction notice, and/or towing the vehicle or vehicles in question if needed. Just 16% of all Norfolk County OPP bylaw calls over the last 4 years were parking related. Noise complaints would typically include loud parties and music and similar noise issues. These would require an OPP response to issue a warning at first. If not complied with, the officer would be expected to complete an OPP bylaw complaint form and submit it for investigation and potential charges after the fact by a bylaw enforcement officer. Just 12% of all Norfolk OPP bylaw calls over the last 4 years were noise related. In both cases, an OPP officer could potentially be called to testify as a witness in a bylaw prosecution, but that would be, in my view, exceedingly rare. At this point, I would like to continue with some thoughts regarding after-hours animal complaints made by the public and also touch briefly on firearms calls. As mentioned, Section 6B of the Norfolk County OPP Policing Agreement states that animal control will not form part of the agreement. Now, that being the case, by their very nature, some animal issues do require at least initial after-hours attendance by the OPP for public safety reasons. These include dog bites. The OPP are not asked to investigate dog bite complaints, but are being asked to assist the public and bylaw by attending to take the initial details of the call and to advise the owner to quarantine the animal for public safety reasons. The OPP officer would then complete the OPP bylaw complaint form so that bylaw could notify the health unit and complete a Dog Owners Liability Act investigation. Of course, the OPP can also complete a DOLA investigation and lay charges. Just 7% of all Norfolk OPP bylaw calls over the last 4 years were related to dog issues. Dispatching of sick or injured animals. Norfolk County bylaw officers carry no use of force options, and as such, the OPP are needed to attend at any time for a call regarding a sick or injured animal on public property. Private property owners dealing with sick or injured animals after hours should be directed by OPP dispatch to contact Hillside Kennels, who is our local private contractor. The OPP may choose to call Hillside as well, and are encouraged to do so in cases where there are diseased animals that are removed and not left out in the open, which could affect other animals and humans. Stray animals. OPP dispatch should inform the complainant to contact Hillside Kennels if an animal can be contained, or if it's sick, injured, or aggressive, Hillside will come and take care of a stray animal as well. In dealing with the provision of adequate care for animals, this includes food, water, shelter, sanitation, veterinary care, and more. And it's covered under both the Provincial Animal Welfare Services Act, commonly called PAWS, and a Norfolk County bylaw. If the OPP receives a complaint regarding an animal care issue after hours, they're asked to complete and submit their OPP bylaw complaint form. Bylaw will then investigate or contact PAWS to assign an inspector to investigate. In urgent circumstances where the investigating OPP officer determines the situation cannot wait, the officer should contact PAWS themselves to report abuse. Cruelty to animals. This is a criminal code offense and an OPP responsibility to investigate. This would include complaints of pets locked in excessively hot or cold vehicles where the immediate health of the animal appears to be in jeopardy. And finally, dealing with animals' livestock escape. This has the immediate potential to affect public safety and is an OPP responsibility to investigate at any hour. Where firearms complaints are concerned, Norfolk County has 2 or 3 bylaws that deal with permitting the discharging of a firearm at a minimum of 500 feet from a dwelling house. Norfolk County is looking at either repealing these or consolidating them into one bylaw next year. These types of proximity type complaints are very rare. However, noise complaints regarding firearms discharge do arise from time to time and can be dealt with through the county noise bylaw. As such, a complainant should be asked by OPP dispatch to complete and submit a complaint form regarding a noise from firearms. Criminal code legislation dealing with the safe use of firearms is sufficient to address firearm safety complaints in most cases and is dealt with by the OPP. So, Mr. Chair, that's it. Out of the many Norfolk County bylaws in place, we are asking that just 2 be assisted with after hours, and that animal and firearm complaints be assisted with as the individual situations dictate. There has been some previous discussion regarding the cost to Norfolk County for the provision of after-hours investigation by the OPP, and perhaps some misconception as well as to the actual costs involved when the OPP billing model is considered. Now, before I go on with my remarks, I'm going to be giving you some percentages and figures, and I'm sorry if it sounds like a lot, but that's the way the billing model is designed. But I'll try to be as concise as I can. when the OPP does its billing, it looks at a 4-year average, and I'm sure you know that already, but the 4-year average for bylaw calls investigated by the OPP in Norfolk County is 252 calls per year, or 0.7 calls in a 24-hour period. Now, certainly OPP staffing fluctuates, and I don't want to be locked into this, but a rough estimate would have 10 to 15 officers working during an average 24-hour period. So the task of assisting with less than one bylaw call a day would not be considered onerous. It should be noted that the majority of OPP detachments do bylaw work in addition to their other duties. The OPP have provided an analysis of the Norfolk County bylaw calls from their records management system. However, given the way that the coding information is entered by officers, it's difficult to tell what action was taken at the majority of these calls. What is known is that a charge was laid in just 12% of OPP investigated bylaw calls in Norfolk. And it's believed that a good portion of that number was related to the issuing of parking infraction notices, which in and of itself should take no more than 5 or 10 minutes to complete. Just 7% of OPP bylaw calls related to parking complaint issues. While the potential of officers having to attend more important calls for service at the exact same time as a bylaw call is there, the incidence of that occurring is considered extremely low. In any event, there is a complex system in place to triage OPP calls for service, including the OPP dispatcher, the on-duty supervisor, and of course, the individual officer, who will no doubt be able to determine the priority of a call that he or she is dispatched to. By their nature, bylaw calls will always be near the lowest tier for a policing response when there's a coincidental call for service. As to cost, I think it's important to review some numbers for your consideration and to do a very basic review of OPP billing. Inspector Varga will have more detailed information on that if you require it later, and of course you can always review it again with OPP Municipal Policing Bureau as well. Norfolk County will pay over $13,300,000 for OPP services next year. The cost to a municipality is determined using two factors. The first is the base cost, which is the total amount to keep the lights on, and includes infrastructure, training, equipment, vehicles, and more. This particular cost is divided up among municipalities who pay a cost per property based on the total number of properties in that municipality. The second part of the total bill deals with calls for service. The majority of these are considered billable. Municipalities pay for their portion of the 4-year average of all billable calls for service across the OPP. For 2021, Norfolk County will be billed about 3.5% of all OPP billable calls for service province-wide. So that's our percentage of what goes on in the entire province, is 3.5% here in Norfolk. This amounts to just under $6 million in the 2021 contract. The 4-year average number of all OPP billable calls for service is approximately 388,000. Okay, so the billable calls across the province, not here in Norfolk, 388,000. The 4-year average of Norfolk billable calls for service is approximately 14,500. So that's, so of those rather, 14,500 calls in Norfolk, there was an average of just 252 bylaw calls each year. So of our billable calls for service, our 252 bylaw calls, that's 1.7% of the total billable calls in the county here. The percentage of those 252 Norfolk bylaw calls in relation to the entire 388,000 provincial billable calls for service that our billing is based on is decimal 0.0006 or 0.6/10,000%. If you consider our Norfolk County billing for billable calls is $6 million, and you take that 0.10% away from that number by eliminating every single bylaw call we do here, you realize a savings of $3,600 province-wide, or $128 based on our 3.5% here in Norfolk. That's if they did no bylaw calls at all. Now, the OPP billing model does assign a value, I guess, to a bylaw call for service. But if you're looking in actual terms of what it costs, it's very, very small. It's very minute. So considering the lack of impact on OPP staffing, the near imperceptible financial impact to the contract here in Norfolk, and the need to provide a basic level of after-hours bylaw assistance to the citizens of Norfolk County, I would encourage Inspector Varga to consider adopting these recommendations in a memorandum of understanding to be attached to the current contract. And subject to any questions, Mr. Chair, those are my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Milson. So I'll open up to the floor. Okay, Councillor Columbus.
Yes, Mr. Milson, it's a very good report you gave, but wonder if we can get a copy of that
Of course.
sometime. Thanks.
Any other questions? Madam Mayor?
No questions per se, just a big thank you to Jim for all the work that they've done in bylaw to date. I could ask one question here to him. In terms of, I think we all understand the maybe not needing bylaw officers in the evenings as much, and weighing out the cost implications with that. But could you comment, Jim, on sort of, especially during the summer months on the weekends, and how you see, changes to that department, or, to future contracts, or whether you think that would be useful, I guess.
Thank you, Mayor. It would be useful for sure. We did adjust the county contract or the QP contract here through a provincial rule that was in place for COVID, and we were allowed to extend our bylaw officers outside of their current QP contract to work weekends, and literally to adjust their time any time that we needed to get the job done for COVID. Essentially, we could have done a lot more, but we settled on just having weekend coverage when the bulk of our tourists were expected to be here. We don't know what 2021 holds for us, and of course we're all hoping that it holds much greater things than it did this year, and more freedoms. But if we find ourselves with the same restrictions, and the province allows a contract to be looked at again, we may have to have that discussion and adjust our working hours. We have the luxury of having bylaw students working for the county as well, and hopefully that program will continue next summer. We had started with 2 for half the summer, added another one, and got some extremely good results in my opinion. My request is to have 4 students for next year. And what that does is it allows our bylaw officers more time to deal with calls for service, and adds us the capacity, the flexibility where those hours are concerned. So barring the county adding any more FTEs, any more employees to county bylaw, we will have to look at some scheduling to deal with the increased hours in the summer. So a long-winded response, Mayor, but that's my comment on that.
Thanks, Tim. No, I just wanted everybody to understand. So we did, we had bylaw officers working weekends throughout the pandemic. Like you said, as a result of steps that the province had taken, but that's not something that's going to have to come back and be the next time a collective agreement comes up for a negotiation with QB. That's going to have to be something that's on the table if we want to make a change to that. But unfortunately, it makes it difficult to make a change right now.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. I also wanted to make note that we do have our county, Norfolk County clerk, Andy, also joining us, and I understand our Norfolk County county solicitor is also here present, so I want to welcome both to the view. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any more questions? Member Van Hoot?
No, just to thank Mr. Nilsson for the report. It was, for me, as a first time going through this, it kind of updates me on how this all works. And I guess the question, I guess it takes a lot of cooperation, right, between Chief of Police and yourself to work through these things. And so I'd be interested in the comments as well from Chief of Police and how things are working and if everything is going as planned.
Very good question. Chief, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Chair. Jim and I have had several conversations. Prior to this year, there's never been a formal memorandum of understanding between the OPP detachment commander and the county in regards to bylaw as set out within the contract. So basically what I'm asking for is a formal memorandum set out. And prior to this, we've had a very good working relationship with Bylaw. And I think in the last, 6 months, Jim, we've developed a referral form, which is something that I think will benefit both of us. And we've been able to narrow down just what bylaws the OPP need to enforce after hours, on weekends, stat holidays. And if reviewed Jim's report and everything in it is accurate, and I have no issues with anything in there other than animal control. Again, I talked to Jim earlier in that if there's a animal to be dispatched on county property, then rather than firing a firearm off in downtown Simcoe, Wellington Park, we should have the opportunity, as well as a private citizen, to phone Hillside Kennels, have the animal picked up, and then the bill gets sent to the municipality, same as it would a private person phoning for a raccoon on their own property. But other than that, I think if Paula wants to put a formal memorandum of understanding together based on the content of Jim's report, I'll gladly have it reviewed by our legal, and we can move forward.
Thank you, Chief. One question to you, Chief, is, so if I understand this correctly, so the last 21 years, the communication between Norfolk County Bylaw and the OPP really hasn't been open, let's say?
No, I wouldn't say it hasn't been open. It's been open. It's just there's never been really any formal agreement as to what bylaws we would enforce. And I must admit, from I don't want to, it's de-amalgamation. Is that how would you put it? When Haldeman and Norfolk split and the county was formed, there was many bylaws from townships and counties, and that made it rather difficult to enforce bylaw enforcement, but that's being consolidated, which is very good. And sometimes there was a bit of a disagreement as to who investigated what, but we've worked through that.
Thank you, Chief. I just have Councillor Columbus, go ahead.
Yes, the question I had was, we came up one time where we were talking about commissionaires. Just wonder if Mr. Milson can comment on that subject, whether he's explored it at all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Columbus. We haven't explored that. I believe it was discussed prior to my arrival with the county, but and I think they did work here for a while doing parking enforcement, if I'm not mistaken, but it's an expensive process for the county. We don't have a large urban presence here in the county. We have some urban areas that require some maintenance, but it's not like working in downtown Peel or Toronto or anywhere else where there's constant traffic issues. I've worked in this county for 15 years with the OPP, and I worked a lot of night shifts downtown, and after a certain hour, there's just not a whole lot to be concerned with. It's put to bed. There are some issues, and that's why we rely on our policing partners to help out after hours. And that's why the maintenance of our relationship and this agreement is so important, because we do work with our partners, and when we say that, we mean it in the truest sense. So I have a deep appreciation of what it takes to do a call for service in the middle of the night. And it can be taxing if they're very busy, and certainly, as I said in my report, the expectation is not that the OPP puts bylaw investigation on the front burner. If they can deal with a call for service and can let us know the details of it, in most cases, we'll follow it up on the next day. So, in answer to your question, there isn't really the need for it through the evening hours to pay for commissionaire to do a little bit of parking enforcement or a little bit of noise enforcement. When you're dealing with 0.7 calls every 24 hours, there's enough OPP officers there that if they need to deal with something, I'm sure that they can, unless there's another competing call for service. And then again, it's not expected that they'll put bylaw as a priority. So I don't believe personally that it would be a good investment of the county's money to engage in private contracted services any more than it would be to have them do the OPP calls for service.
Thanks for the explanation. I appreciate your comments. And, Mr. Chairman, when the OPP do get called out after hours, I take it's primarily on a complaint basis. It's not where they're looking for this barking dog or where this car is parked illegally. It would be on a complaint call basis. Is that right, Mr. Mills?
Absolutely it is, and the detachment commander and I have spoken about that and clarified that. It's a complaint basis. I personally, when I was on patrol, would go downtown for something to do, and I would lay parking charges on cars that were sitting overnight that shouldn't be there, usually in winter because of snow removal issues. And it's certainly up to individual officers if they decide they want to do that. They have parking infraction notice books, most of them anyways, but that is certainly not the expectation that they go out looking for bylaw work at all.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Columbus? Mr. Milson, I have a question. You referred to 16% of parking infractions, and then you referred to noise infractions of 12%. So if my math is correctly, we're talking 28% is parking and noise. And you're telling us that it's sufficient that bylaw at this point in time are doing a good job with regards to parking and noise complaints?
So, yeah, that's what the OPP has done. They had 252 calls on a 4-year average. A lot of the way the coding is done, some of it's referred to as other, and so it's difficult to determine exactly what the officers did there, what kind of call it was. And it's no fault of the OPP, it's just the way coding is done provincially for bylaw. When it comes down to those figures, that total figure, 26, I think is what you said. At any rate, that's of the 252, and that's over a whole year. So there's not that much there, to be honest with you. And if you remember my remarks, it was simply a matter of most of the time it's taking that initial part of the investigation to say it's time to quiet the noise down or you need to move your car. It's very simple, and it's not very complicated, and it's not onerous, I don't think, on the OPP to do those things.
My last question, Mr. Milson, is this. So after 5 o'clock, any calls that are placed, and if an individual, say, leaves a message on your machine at 5:05, is there someone there to answer that call?
We don't have live answer after hours. So the county has gone to a new one-window system rather than having a number of customer service representatives around the county. And their live answer, and they'll take messages as well during business hours. So on weekends and after hours, no, there's no live answer for that. What I think history dictates is that bylaw generally is not an emergent situation. It's an annoyance for people. And most of the calls, in my opinion, can wait until the next Monday or the next day for service by a municipal law enforcement officer.
The last question would be, even though I said it was already the last question, second last question. So let's put it this way. If the general public out there understands that bylaw works from 9 to 5. So we're telling the general public then, on a weekend, their best bet would be to contact the OPP 1888 number, unless it's an emergency, to dial 911? Is that what you're letting us know?
That's what I would suggest they do, because the only other alternative is for them to leave a message on the one window number, which they can do. I don't want the public to get the impression that they should be calling the OPP non-emergency line for everything, because they're very busy people. And I think the public should be educated enough to know that if it's a bylaw issue they want an answer to, or it's an annoyance that can wait till the next day, just use the form that's online. It's a very simple form. It's at norfolkcounty.ca on the bylaw page. And there's two forms. One's a complaint form, one's an information form. And when they press submit on either form, it puts it into the bylaw mailbox, which I retrieve on a daily basis on Monday or after the weekend or any day of the week. I also have it on my phone, which I occasionally look at through the weekend, and if there's something that happens, I can direct an officer Monday morning to deal with it a little more expeditiously. But essentially, there is no capacity in the county to do after-hours calls at night or on the weekends, so the public is limited to either putting that complaint form in or contacting the OPP. I would strongly encourage them to take the first choice first, and that's to use the bylaw complaint form, and we'll dispatch it to an officer the next available working day.
Thank you, Mr. Milson. Any other questions? Seeing that there is none, we can move on. And by moving on, I would suggest that, the two issues here that are under review and have been explained to us are noise and parking. So being that there are no more questions with regards to noise or parking bylaws, I would suggest that we adjourn. So with that, I would ask, if there are no other questions, that a board member could move so we could reconsider or we consider adjourning this meeting. Mr. Columbus?
Mr. Chair, we've got this document dated November 4th. It's got the 25 questions. Were we going to relate it all to those, like excessive noise from motorcycles? And I know that's all part of the subject, but, you need the right instrumentation to detect what's allowable noise and what's not, and those types of things. So is this, the memorandum of understanding, is it going to cover these 25 questions? Is that it?
My understanding is that these questions that were posed last week won't be answered within a span of 5 days. It will probably take, I would think, at least another week or so to have answers to each and every question. We can ask these questions of Mr. Milson, but to be fair, there's numerous questions here. I don't think that we're going to have the answers to all questions, Councillor Columbus. So I would think that the majority of the questions that we had with regards to noise and parking have been answered. With regards to the excessive noise from motorcycles, one would think that we'd focus more at our next meeting at the PSB with regards to the OPP, focusing on that because of the Highway Traffic Act. I don't think bylaw can really look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Chief?
Just in regards to a few questions that were posed here, in regards to instrumentation for noise metering, I can categorically say that the OPP will not accept any instrumentation for noise metering because that requires training, and we don't have that training, nor will we be getting it because it's not a normal course of our business. In regards to excessive noise from motorcycles, we can discuss that further, but the issue with that is if we have a motorcycle event, that could be problematic. but that can be a discussion for later.
Thank you, Chief. So my understanding here to Councillor Columbus and to the members is, I don't think we want to reinvent the wheel or gild the lily in respect to what we have. I understand from what I've heard from Mr. Milson is that bylaw knows exactly what needs to be done. The OPP understand what needs to be done. I think what we have to do is prepare a draft agreement between the OPP and bylaw so that we all know who's doing what. That's my understanding, unless I'm wrong here, but we have to be realistic. When I looked at these 25 questions, I figured we'll be here all afternoon. But I think Mr. Milson, Councillor Columbus, has kind of given us an overview or an umbrella of what we're dealing with. There might be other questions that are posed that we don't have the answers to, but I think all in good time. So, Chief, sorry.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Chair, perhaps if a motion was put forward to direct the county solicitor to draft up a memorandum of understanding based on the content of Jim's report, that we can move forward from there and move this process along.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll also move the motion, if that's,
Okay.
yeah.
You'll move? Seconder? Councillor Columbus? Okay.
And-
I'm going to call a vote. All
Just a quick comment, and
Go ahead.
I think that's the key. A lot of this is common sense stuff. It's difficult to, and especially in the bylaw category, I feel for you because it's a lot of details in some of that. But the most important thing is that you got tremendous cooperation between bylaw and the chief of police, and that makes for things working as smooth as possible. And I think that's the important takeaway I got from this. Very much appreciated both reports, and thought it was excellent. So I feel very comfortable with how this is proceeding for the county. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Columbus?
I think too, in the last few weeks, I've heard that we're going to be increasing fines for parking and that type of thing. So that might strengthen a lot of this, a lot of the issues that we face. I see our lawyer there shaking her head yes. So.
Any more discussion? Being that there's no discussion, I'll call the vote. Okay, so we'll move on. Thank you. One thing I want to make very clear here is 21 years later, even though we have 25 good questions, hopefully in time we can have these answered. But I think the majority of the answers did come from bylaw, and I want to thank you, Mr. Milson, for giving us a clear understanding in that regard. And when we do meet on the 25th, if there are any other questions with reference to this, they could definitely come up at the meeting. No problem there. Madam Mayor, do you have any questions?
Sorry, I couldn't find the mute there. Unmute. No questions from me, George. Thanks very much, and thank you to staff.
Okay. From the county clerk, any questions?
Sorry, no questions for me.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
The county solicitor, any questions? No? Chief? No? Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending.